Marcus was reviewing acquisition documents on his tablet when he heard the laughter, a child's giggle, pure and unguarded. He looked up, mildly annoyed at the disruption to his sanctuary, and saw a young woman emerging from the kitchen area carrying a mop bucket. Strapped to her back in a colorful African print carrier was a little girl with bright, curious eyes. The child turned her head, playing peek-a-boo with the restaurant's ambient lighting. That's when Marcus saw it. The gold bracelet on her tiny wrist. Shining. Unmistakable. His heart stopped. That bracelet. That bracelet. The one he'd made from Lagos's most expensive jewelry designer. The same bracelet with the custom engraving he'd supervised for hours, ensuring every letter was perfect. Hope Williams, his daughter's name. His exact design. The world tilted violently. His tablet slipped from trembling hands, clattering against the marble table. Other diners turned to stare, but Marcus couldn't see them, couldn't hear them, and couldn't process anything except the impossible truth staring back at him. His daughter. His hope. Alive. 2 years. 789 days since his wife had looked him in the eyes, tears streaming down her face, and lied to him that their 3-month-old daughter had been kidnapped at gunpoint. 789 days of private investigators, dead ends, sleepless nights, and a grief so profound it had turned the 33-year-old billionaire into a walking ghost. And now, in the Sapphire restaurant on an ordinary Thursday evening in Lagos, he was staring at his lost daughter, alive, healthy, and smiling, strapped to the back of a poor cleaner who looked absolutely terrified of him. Wait. The word exploded from Marcus's throat as the young woman sensed trouble and began turning away. Please, that bracelet, that child. His voice broke. His vision blurred with tears. His hands shook uncontrollably. Because the little girl had turned to look at him fully now, Marcus saw his own eyes staring back at him. That nose. That chin. Features he'd memorized from countless photographs, now 2 years older, moving, breathing, and alive. Before we continue this shocking story, hit that subscribe button right now and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from and what your local time is. Your support keeps these incredible stories coming. To understand how this moment shattered and rebuilt a billionaire's world, we need to go back 2 years and 2 months. Marcus Williams stood at the pinnacle of Lagos's business elite. His property development company had transformed the city skyline with luxury residential towers and commercial complexes that glittered like jewels against the Atlantic coast. Forbes had called him one of Africa's youngest self-made billionaires. At 31, he had everything money could buy. Everything except wisdom in choosing a wife. Jane entered Marcus's structured world like a hurricane wrapped in designer clothes and Instagram filters. She was a social media influencer with 800,000 followers, a woman who lived for the next party, the next trend, the next viral moment. Marcus, lonely at the top of his empire, mistook her energy for light. He saw the warning signs during their courtship, the days she'd disappear chasing content opportunities. The complaints when he wanted quiet evenings instead of club nights. The friends who cared only about aesthetics and never substance. But love, or what he thought was love, made him blind. Marriage will settle her down, he told his concerned friends. She just needs stability. He was catastrophically wrong. A year into their marriage, Jane gave birth to a baby girl. Marcus named her Hope, a name that felt prophetic the moment he held her in the delivery room. His hands shook as he cradled all 7 pounds of her, this tiny miracle who'd managed to break through the armor he'd built around his heart. Within days, Marcus commissioned a custom 24-karat gold bracelet from Lagos's most renowned jeweler. He spent hours perfecting the engraving, Hope Williams, in elegant script, sized perfectly for her tiny wrist with a secure clasp designed to grow with her. The billionaire who once worked 16-hour days transformed overnight. He left the office at 5 p.m. sharp. Learned to change diapers while taking conference calls, sang off-key lullabies at 3 a.m., and documented every milestone in a leather-bound journal. His boardroom colleagues barely recognized the man who now conducted video meetings while bouncing a baby on his knee. But while Marcus fell deeper in love with fatherhood, Jane felt only resentment growing like poison in her chest. The baby's cries interrupted her sleep. Breastfeeding ruined her aesthetic. Her Instagram following declined because she couldn't maintain her party lifestyle. Brand deals dried up. Comments asked where the old Jane had gone. She looked at Hope not with love, but with hatred, seeing he baby as the barrier between herself and the life she craved. On a humid September afternoon, when Hope was exactly 3 months and 4 days old, Jane made a decision that would shatter multiple lives. She drove to an abandoned construction site in Lekki Phase 2, a half-finished luxury apartment complex that had run out of funding. The skeleton of the building stood like a concrete monument to broken dreams, its empty windows staring blindly at the Lagos sky. Jane carried her daughter up 3 flights of unfinished stairs. Her heels clicked against concrete. Hope cooed, oblivious, still wearing her gold bracelet. Jane placed her in a shaded corner, surrounded by cement bags that would muffle her cries. She didn't look back. Not once. 2 hours later, Jane arrived home with makeup strategically smeared and dress torn just right. Her performance was Oscar-worthy. 2 men, she screamed at Marcus, collapsing into his arms. They had guns. They took her from my arms at the mall parking lot. Our baby. They took our baby. Marcus became a man possessed. He hired every private investigator in Lagos, offered a 50 million naira reward, plastered Hope's photo across every billboard from Victoria Island to Ikorodu. The police investigation went nowhere. Security footage from the mall showed no abduction, no evidence of the men Jane described. But Marcus wouldn't believe his wife was lying. He couldn't fathom that level of evil from someone he loved. 6 months passed. Then a year. The leads dried up. The investigators apologized. Friends stopped calling with condolences. The nursery door stayed closed, Hope's journal gathering dust on Marcus's desk. Marcus buried himself in work, building his empire higher while dying inside. He still wore his wedding ring, still shared a bed with Jane, but something inside him had crystallized into ice. The man who'd sung lullabies became a ghost in an expensive suit. Jane, meanwhile, had gotten exactly what she wanted. She resumed her influencer lifestyle, posting photos at luxury restaurants and exclusive clubs. When people asked about the tragedy, she performed her grief perfectly, just enough sadness to seem human, not enough to ruin her aesthetic. And she'd become an expert at preventing another pregnancy. Birth control pills hidden in her makeup bag, tracking her cycle obsessively, making excuses when timing was risky. Marcus, drowning in his own pain, never noticed. But while Marcus grieved and Jane celebrated, something miraculous was happening across Lagos. Grace Okafor, 24 years old, had dreams that felt increasingly foolish with each passing year. A degree in accounting from Lagos State University sat framed in her small Surulere apartment, expensive piece of paper that had opened exactly 0 doors. Graduate unemployment was a crisis, and Grace had spent 2 years applying for positions that always went to people with connections. She'd taken a job as a cleaner at the Sapphire restaurant, earning 45,000 naira monthly, barely enough to support herself and her aging mother. She worked the evening shift, mopping floors after wealthy patrons left, scrubbing bathrooms that cost more to furnish than her yearly salary. That September evening, Grace had been taking her usual shortcut through the Lekki construction site, a route that shaved 15 minutes off her walk to the bus stop. Money for transportation was tight, and every naira counted. She heard the crying first, faint and desperate, echoing through the concrete labyrinth. Her first thought was a cat. Her second was that she should keep walking. Getting involved in Lagos meant trouble. Nothing good came from curiosity in this city. But the crying persisted, pulling at something deep in Grace's chest. Against every survival instinct she'd developed, she followed the sound. She found Hope on the 3rd floor, dehydrated but alive, her tiny face red from hours of screaming. The gold bracelet caught the dying sunlight, glinting like a beacon. Grace's hands trembled as she picked up the baby, checking for injuries, whispering soothing words that came from instinct rather than experience. Grace waited at the site for an hour, hoping someone would return. When darkness fell and no one came, she made a choice that would define her life. She couldn't take the baby to the police. They'd ask questions she couldn't answer, might accuse her of kidnapping. She couldn't afford a hospital. And something about the way this child had been abandoned, alone in the dark, broke her heart in a way she couldn't explain. Grace took Hope home. Her mother, Mama Okafor, asked no questions when Grace arrived with a baby in her arms. She simply boiled water for formula, fashioned a crib from a sturdy box and soft fabric, and helped her daughter navigate this unexpected responsibility. They assumed Hope had been abandoned by a desperate young mother, perhaps a student or someone fleeing domestic violence. The gold bracelet troubled them. It suggested wealth, but they convinced themselves it might be fake, just a pretty trinket some girl had bought at a market. Grace called the baby by the name on the bracelet. Hope. It felt right somehow, like the universe had delivered this child to her for a reason. Life found a rhythm, hard but filled with unexpected joy. Grace worked her evening shifts at the Sapphire while Mama Okafor watched Hope. The little girl thrived despite their poverty. Learning to walk, beginning to talk, her laughter filling their small apartment with light that no amount of money could buy. Grace stretched every naira with creativity born from necessity. She bought second-hand clothes from Yaba Market, cooked beans and rice in bulk, sang songs instead of buying toys. Hope wore the gold bracelet always. Grace had tried to remove it once, but the child had cried so desperately that she'd relented, assuming it was the only connection to her birth mother. Grace occasionally brought Hope to work when Mama Okafor was sick. Her manager disapproved, but looked the other way because Grace was the most reliable employee he had. Hope would sit in the storage room, coloring with crayons Grace bought from street vendors, occasionally toddling out to smile at customers who found her presence charming. 2 years passed this way. 2 years of poverty and love, of sacrifice and joy, of a child growing up knowing nothing but the warmth of Grace's arms. Marcus, meanwhile, had evolved into something harder. His company had tripled in value, but the joy was gone. He moved through board meetings and product launches like an automation. Jade had become more of a stranger than a wife. They occupied the same house but lived separate lives. He'd stopped hoping for another child. Stopped hoping for much of anything. But his therapist had insisted he start reclaiming small pleasures, so Marcus had begun a Thursday evening ritual. Dining alone at the Sapphire, ordering their grilled sea bass, working through his thoughts with good food and solitude. And then came that Thursday evening in November when 2 years collided in the Sapphire restaurant. Marcus was reviewing acquisition documents on his tablet when he heard the laughter, a child's giggle, pure and unguarded. He looked up, mildly annoyed at the disruption to his sanctuary, and saw Grace emerging from the kitchen area carrying a mop bucket. Strapped to her back in a colorful African print carrier was a little girl with bright, curious eyes. The world tilted. The child turned her head, and Marcus saw the bracelet catch the restaurant's ambient lighting. Gold. Distinctive. Impossible. Hope Williams, in that exact script, that exact font he'd agonized over with the jeweler. His heart stopped, restarted, began hammering like it might break through his ribs. Marcus stood so abruptly, his chair scraped loudly against the floor. Other diners looked over. Grace, sensing trouble, instinctively turned away, shielding Hope. "Wait," Marcus said, his voice strangled. "Please wait." Grace froze as the wealthy man approached, every instinct screaming danger. Rich man. Baby she wasn't supposed to have. This could only end with police, accusations, prison. Marcus moved slowly, hands visible, non-threatening. Years of negotiating billion-naira deals had taught him to read people, and he saw genuine fear in this young woman's eyes, but also something else that stopped him cold. Protectiveness. Love. "The bracelet," Marcus said softly, his voice shaking. "May I see it?" Grace's hand moved instinctively to cover Hope's wrist. "It's hers. It's always been hers." "I know," Marcus said, and tears began streaming down his face, shocking himself, shocking Grace, shocking the now silent restaurant full of Lagos's elite. "I know because I had it made for her. 2 years and 2 months ago. Before someone took her from me." Grace looked ready to bolt. Hope, sensing the tension, began to whimper, reaching for the only mother she'd ever known. Marcus did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He stepped back, giving Grace space. His security instinct screamed to grab his daughter and run. But something deeper, maybe the way Hope clung to Grace, maybe the genuine terror in this young woman's eyes, made him pause. "Please," he said, and the word came out broken. "I'm not going to hurt you or take her. But please, just tell me, where did you find her?" Grace made a calculation in that moment. This man's grief was too raw to be fake. His tears too real. And if he was truly Hope's father, didn't he deserve to know she was alive? So in the middle of the Sapphire, while wealthy diners pretended not to eavesdrop and pulled out phones to record, Grace told her story. The construction site. The abandoned baby. 2 years of loving a child who wasn't biologically hers but had become her entire world. Marcus listened, his brilliant mind assembling pieces of a puzzle he'd stopped trying to solve. "The day she disappeared," he said slowly, his voice deadly quiet, "my wife said it was an abduction. At the mall. But the police never found evidence. No witnesses. No footage." Their eyes met across 3 feet of restaurant floor, and unspoken understanding passed between them. Grace, who'd grown up on Lagos streets, knew the types of women who abandoned children. Marcus, who'd built companies by reading patterns others missed, saw the truth he'd been too heartbroken to acknowledge. His wife had lied. His wife had done this. "What's your name?" Marcus asked, his voice carefully controlled. "Grace. Grace Okafor." "Grace," he repeated, and the name felt significant in ways he couldn't yet process. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Has Hope been happy? Has she been loved?" Grace's eyes welled with tears. "She's been everything to me. To us. My mother and I, we've given her everything we could, even when it wasn't much." Marcus looked at his daughter, who was now peeking at him with cautious curiosity, and felt a storm of emotions. Rage at Jane, grief for lost time, wonder that Hope was alive, and something unexpected, gratitude toward this stranger who'd saved his child when he couldn't. "What happens now?" Grace whispered, voicing the question terrifying them both. Marcus pulled out his phone. Grace braced for police. But he called his lawyer instead. "David, I need you at the Sapphire restaurant in Victoria Island. Immediately. Bring discretion and your clearest head." Then he looked at Grace, and she saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. Not anger. Not accusation. Something like respect. "What happens now is that you and I figure out how to do what's best for Hope. Together. Because you're the only reason she's alive, and I don't forget debts like that." David Adelik, Marcus's lawyer and closest friend since university, arrived within 30 minutes. He'd expected a business emergency. Instead, he found his normally controlled friend barely holding together, a nervous young woman in a cleaning uniform, and a toddler who'd become the center of an impossible situation. They relocated to Marcus's penthouse, a place so luxurious that Mama Okafor, who arrived in a panic, couldn't speak for 5 full minutes. Hope, overwhelmed by the change, clung to Grace, occasionally glancing at this strange man who kept staring at her with wet eyes. Marcus ordered food, enough for a small army, and they talked through the night. David took notes, his legal mind cataloging every detail. Marcus called his private investigator, the same one who'd failed to find Hope 2 years ago, and now gave him a different assignment. I want surveillance on my wife. Every movement. Every transaction. Every lie. And I want evidence." Over the next week, Marcus visited Grace's apartment daily. He'd arrive after work, still in his tailored suits worth more than her yearly salary, and sit on their threadbare couch while hope gradually warmed to him. He brought gifts, thoughtful ones, not the excessive displays of wealth that might overwhelm. A stuffed elephant because Grace mentioned Hope loved animals. Books with colorful pictures. New crayons when he noticed hers were worn to stubs. He didn't demand to take Hope home. Not yet. He watched how Grace cared for her, the gentle patience, the creative solutions to keep a toddler entertained with limited resources. He saw how Mama Okafor sang Yoruba lullabies that Hope knew by heart. He realized, with painful clarity, that removing Hope from this environment would traumatize her, regardless of DNA. Meanwhile, the private investigator worked. He retrieved Hope's medical records from Jane's pregnancy, blood type, genetic markers. He obtained samples from Hope's toothbrush during one of Marcus's visits, with Grace's permission. The DNA test came back 99.99% certain. Hope Williams was biologically Marcus's daughter. But the investigator delivered something more damning. He'd pulled Jane's social media posts from the day Hope disappeared, each with timestamps and geolocation data. He'd obtained cell tower records through contacts in the telecommunications industry. The data told a story Jane's lies couldn't hide. Her phone had been at the Lekki construction site that afternoon, not at the mall where she claimed the abduction happened. More evidence piled up. Construction workers who frequented the site remembered seeing a woman matching Jane's description. One recalled a distinctive white Range Rover, the same model Jane drove. During a discreet search of Marcus's home, the investigator found Jane's hidden stash of birth control pills, systematically preventing the pregnancy Marcus believed they'd been trying for. David laid it all out in Marcus's study one evening. The evidence spread across mahogany like accusations made paper. "You have enough for criminal charges," David said carefully. "Attempted murder. Child abandonment. She'd go to prison for 15 to 20 years. Marcus stared at the evidence, his hand clenched around a glass of whiskey he hadn't touched. And Hope would know her mother tried to kill her. That story would follow her forever. Every Google search of her name would bring up articles about the mother who abandoned her to die. "So what do you want to do?" Marcus was quiet for a long time. Then he opened his laptop and began typing with the same decisive focus he brought to Billionaire deals. Marcus arranged a dinner at home, a rarity that made Jane suspicious until he said he wanted to reconnect, to try again. She agreed, pleased that her husband seemed to be moving past his depression. She wore a designer dress that cost more than Grace's yearly salary, had her makeup professionally done, and approached the evening like a social media opportunity. The dining table was set beautifully. Candles flickered. Soft music played. And sitting at Marcus's place was a manila envelope that seemed to suck the oxygen from the room. Jane's smile faltered. "What's this?" "Open it," Marcus said, his voice perfectly calm. Inside were the DNA results. The cell tower records. Screenshots of her social media timestamps proving her lies. Photos, Hope, alive and beautiful, being held by Grace. And a small plastic bag containing birth control pills the investigator had found hidden in her makeup drawer. The color drained from Jane's face like water from a broken glass. She looked up at Marcus, and whatever she saw in his eyes made her step backward, her designer heels clicking against marble. "She's alive," Jane whispered. "No thanks to you." Marcus's voice was perfectly controlled, which made it more terrifying than shouting. "You drove our 3-month-old daughter to an abandoned building and left her to die. You looked me in the eyes for 2 years and performed grief while secretly taking pills to prevent another pregnancy so you wouldn't be trapped again." Jane's mind raced, searching for lies, finding none that would work against this mountain of evidence. "Marcus, I was sick. After the baby, I wasn't myself. Don't. The single word cut like a blade. Being sick after childbirth doesn't make someone drive across Lagos to an abandoned site. That requires planning. Intention. You didn't have a breakdown, Jade. You made a choice. You chose your Instagram followers over our daughter's life. Tears began streaming down Jane's face, but Marcus felt nothing. No sympathy. No anger. Just cold, surgical precision. I could send you to prison, he continued, tapping the evidence. I have enough here to ensure you'd never see daylight again. Child abandonment. Attempted murder. You'd be 50 years old before you got out, and your influencer career would be very over. Jane began sobbing, mascara running down her face. Please, Marcus. But I'm not going to do that. Do you know why? Jane shook her head, terrified. Because Hope doesn't need the world knowing her mother tried to murder her. Because she deserves a narrative that doesn't include your evil. So here's what's going to happen, and these are not negotiations. Marcus laid out divorce papers. The settlement was specific and brutal. Jane would receive nothing, no alimony, no assets, no stake in his companies. She would sign away all parental rights immediately. She would leave Lagos within 30 days. And if she ever contacted Hope, ever tried to sell the story to the press, ever breathed a word about what happened, Marcus would release everything and prosecute her to the fullest extent of Nigerian law. You're destroying my life, Jane sobbed. No, Marcus said coldly, standing to his full height. You destroyed it yourself when you left our daughter to die in a construction site. I'm giving you an option you didn't give Hope, a chance to survive. Take it, or go to prison. Choose now. Jane signed. She had no choice. No leverage. No defense. Within 3 weeks, she'd moved to Accra, Ghana, reinventing herself with a new name and new followers, her social media scrubbed of all references to her marriage or motherhood, as if Hope had never existed. Marcus felt no satisfaction in her departure. Only a cold sense of justice served and a chapter closed. But the harder conversation still waited, and it terrified him more than any business deal ever had. Marcus and Grace sat in his penthouse while Hope napped in a bedroom larger than Grace's entire apartment, exhausted from playing with toys she didn't understand the value of. I want her back, Marcus said, and watched Grace's face crumble, tears spilling before he could continue. But not like you're thinking. He pushed papers across the table. Grace, expecting legal documents seizing Hope and ending her world, was confused to find something else entirely. Adoption papers. Joint custody agreements. And an employment contract. What is this? Grace whispered, unable to process what she was seeing. You saved my daughter's life, Marcus said, leaning forward, his voice intense. You gave her love when she had nothing. You worked yourself to exhaustion for 45,000 naira a month and still found ways to make her smile. You're the only mother she's ever known, Grace. I'm not cruel enough to rip her away from that. I don't understand, Grace said, her hands shaking as she looked at the papers. I'm saying I want you to officially adopt Hope with me. Shared parental rights. I'm saying I want to hire you as her full-time caregiver, salary, benefits, housing. I'm saying Hope needs both of us, and I'm not going to make her choose. Why? Grace whispered, tears streaming freely now. Why would you do this? I'm nobody. I clean floors. I live in a one-room apartment in Suralere. I can't give her what you can. You already gave her what I couldn't, Marcus interrupted. You gave her life. You gave her love. You sang to her when I thought she was dead. For 2 years, I had money, investigators, resources, and I failed. You had nothing but a good heart, and you saved her. He stood, walking to the window overlooking Lagos's glittering skyline. I've learned something these past 2 years. Money can build empires. Money can buy comfort. But money didn't save Hope. You did. And Hope lights up when you walk in the room in a way she doesn't yet with me. Because you're her mother, Grace. Not biologically, but in every way that matters. Mama Okafor, who'd been listening from the kitchen, emerged with her own tears flowing. "You're a good man," she told Marcus. "God bless you." "God already did," Marcus said, looking toward the bedroom where Hope slept. "He sent Grace to that construction site." If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button, subscribe to our channel for more incredible true-to-life stories, and comment below what you've learned from this story. Also, remember to comment, "Hope," if you believe in second chances. Your support helps us bring more inspiring stories to light. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss our next story.